The Harpo Studios stage shimmered beneath the wash of high-powered lights, every inch of its surface designed to radiate grace and gravitas. Gleaming floors reflected the studio's ornate chandeliers, and deep crimson velvet chairs lent a sense of theatrical opulence. At the center of the grandeur sat Oprah Winfrey, cultural queenmaker, daytime monarch, and architect of emotional enlightenment. Her empire was built on connection, transformation, and stories that pierced the soul. Today, however, she had something else in mind, something sharper. The show was titled Spirituality in the New Age, a live broadcast that promised to explore modern beliefs, inner power, and what guides people in a chaotic world. The audience, curated to perfection, ranged from spiritual influencers to everyday seekers, all buzzing with anticipation. The opening applause boomed like thunder as the cameras zoomed in on the queen of daytime television. Behind Oprah's poised smile and serene tone, however, a different motive flickered. Unknown to viewers and even many staff, the producers had aligned with her for something more confrontational, a subtle takedown of her guest's traditional faith. That guest was Senator John Neely Kennedy from Louisiana, a figure known as much for his no-nonsense Southern wit as for his outspoken Christianity. Oprah, armed with cultural prestige and intellectual dexterity, believed she could maneuver him into a corner, expose his beliefs as outdated, and reveal her expansive worldview as the superior alternative. But what no one foresaw was that Kennedy had not come to play defense. He'd come with resolve, clarity, and a quiet fire that would alter the course of the show. As Kennedy walked onto the stage, he exuded a peace that was almost jarring in such a high-stakes environment. His suit was crisp but modest, his demeanor open yet deliberate. In his pocket, tucked carefully away, was a small, well-worn Bible, not for dramatic flair, but as a spiritual anchor. The audience clapped, though the tone was subdued, part curiosity, part caution. They knew Kennedy wasn't your average guest. He didn't posture or perform. He simply spoke what he believed, and that unsettled people. Oprah welcomed him with her signature grace, her voice velvet smooth. "Senator Kennedy, thank you for joining us," she said, her eyes warm but analyzing. "Today's conversation is one I believe we both care deeply about. What guides us, spiritually, in a world that feels increasingly divided and confusing?" Kennedy nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Glad to be here, Oprah," he replied, his voice a comforting rumble of Southern cadence, the kind that seemed to slow down time. He sat with ease, but not carelessly. His hands rested gently on his knees, his posture the kind of quiet readiness you might find in a man used to walking into rooms where he wasn't always welcome. Inside, however, he was grounded. He had prayed before coming, asking not for victory, but for the courage to speak with honesty, no matter the cost. Oprah might control the stage, but she didn't control his spirit. The first portion of the interview unfolded with familiar rhythm. Oprah asked about his constituents in Louisiana, the complexity of politics in the digital age, and how he stayed connected to people. Kennedy answered with a disarming blend of sincerity and Southern charm. He spoke about rural towns, single moms, church barbecues, and storm-battered communities. The audience chuckled at his dry humor, their wariness softening, until the tone shifted. Then came the pivot, subtle but unmistakable. Oprah leaned in, her smile still warm but her eyes sharp. "Senator," she said smoothly, "you often reference your Christian beliefs. You've said they're central to who you are. But don't you think, in such a diverse world, that insisting there's only one path to God feels Exclusionary? The studio air tightened. The audience hushed, heads turning toward Kennedy. This was the moment. The calculated challenge. The question didn't just probe belief. It questioned its legitimacy. Oprah's words were polished, but the implication was pointed. How dare you claim spiritual exclusivity in a world full of options? Kennedy didn't flinch. He took a breath, glanced at Oprah, then turned gently toward the audience. "Oprah," he began, his tone calm but full of gravity. "Let me tell you about a woman I met in Baton Rouge. Her name's Mary." His voice settled into the cadence of a storyteller, not a debater. "Mary's a single mother, lost her husband in a wreck 3 years ago, works 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. Every morning, before the sun's up, she sits at her kitchen table and prays. Not for money, not for ease, but for strength." He paused. The studio fell into complete silence. "She told me," Kennedy continued, "that her faith in Jesus is what gets her through the day, that it's the only light she's got in a dark world. That's not a theory. That's not philosophy. That's her lifeline." It was a moment no producer could have scripted. The emotional honesty in Kennedy's words landed with force, raw, human, and entirely outside the typical TV polish. Some in the crowd wiped their eyes. Oprah's expression froze. She had aimed for a theological standoff, but received a human story that bypassed her frame entirely. Recovering, she tilted her head, trying to recalibrate. "That's a powerful story, Senator," she said, her tone tightening slightly. "But my question was about belief systems in a broader context. Isn't it problematic to promote a single truth in a world filled with so many traditions?" The IBM studio murmured, some viewers nodding in agreement, others unsure. The tension rose again. Oprah's challenge was now more direct, more strategic. She wasn't just questioning Kennedy's belief. She was positioning it as a potential threat to inclusivity. Kennedy nodded, acknowledging the weight of her question. Then he leaned forward slightly. "Oprah," he said firmly, but without heat. "I'm not here to force my faith on anybody. But you asked what guides me, and I've got to tell the truth." He held up his hands as if to say, "This isn't about me." Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Those are his words, not mine. And if I believe they're true, I can't pretend otherwise just to be polite. The words rang through the studio like a bell. Some applauded, quietly at first. Others shifted uncomfortably. Kennedy hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't condemned anyone. He had simply said what he believed, with unshakable clarity. For the first time in her storied career, Oprah didn't have a ready pivot. The emotional architecture of her narrative, the unity through plurality model, had encountered something different, something immovable. She pressed on. "But Senator," she said, voice growing firmer, "don't you see how billions of people follow other faiths, Islam, Buddhism, even secular philosophies? Are you saying they're all wrong?" The question hit hard, designed like a trap. If he said yes, he was judgmental. If no, he'd undermine his own faith. The room tensed, the air heavy. Kennedy sat back for a beat, then closed his eyes briefly, perhaps in silent prayer. Then he looked at Oprah, calm and composed. "Truth isn't decided by majority vote," he said softly. "If a bridge is out, I'm not going to tell folks to take whichever road feels right. I'll point to the safe one. That's not judgment. That's love." The metaphor cut through the fog like a spotlight. The crowd gasped, a few clapping, others stunned by the sheer force of simplicity. Oprah's expression flickered, her control slipping. She hadn't expected him to speak in metaphors that carried such moral weight. Her rebuttals, suddenly, felt rehearsed. Still, she pushed again, desperate to regain control. So, what you're saying is, if someone doesn't believe what you believe, they're lost? Kennedy shook his head gently. I'm saying we're all lost, until someone finds us. I'm not better than anyone. I just know who rescued me. And I want people to meet him too. Silence settled like mist. The audience, captivated, had shifted allegiance. Not from Oprah's empire to Kennedy's doctrine, but from performance to something more elusive. Authenticity. Kennedy's final sentence lingered in the air like the scent of rain before a storm. The audience, frozen in a collective hush, absorbed the gentle power behind his words. He hadn't preached, postured, or pleaded. He had simply borne witness, and the room felt it. Oprah, ever the composed conductor of conversation, found herself momentarily out of rhythm. She cleared her throat, her voice steady but thinner than before. "Senator," she began, "you've obviously thought deeply about your beliefs, and I can respect that. But let's be honest, you're also a politician. Some might say that invoking Jesus on the campaign trail is less about faith and more about strategy. Isn't there a risk of using religion to manipulate voters?" The question was calculated, laced with skepticism. It wasn't just a dig, it was an attempt to reframe Kennedy's convictions as convenient optics. The audience shifted again. Some nodded. Others looked to Kennedy with curiosity, awaiting his response. Kennedy didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached slowly into his jacket and pulled out a small, creased paper. He unfolded it gently, treating it more like a sacred object than a prop. "This," he said, holding it with care, "is a letter from a woman in New Orleans. Her name is Carla. She's got a 10-year-old boy named Tommy. He's been fighting leukemia for 2 years now." The crowd leaned in. Even Oprah tilted forward, not sure where this was going. "Carla wrote to me after watching one of my speeches. I'd talked about faith, about how sometimes hope is all we've got when nothing else makes sense." Tommy heard that speech and told his mama, "If that man says God loves me, I think I can be brave today." Kennedy's voice wavered, not with hesitation, but with reverence. "That letter isn't a campaign prop. It's why I do what I do. I didn't quote scripture to win votes. I did it because kids like Tommy need something real to hold on to." The studio fell still, thick with emotion. Audience members glanced at one another, some biting their lips, others blinking hard. Kennedy folded the letter and placed it back, in his pocket, like a relic. "Oprah," he continued, "my faith isn't a ladder I climb for success. It's the ground I stand on when everything else crumbles." Oprah, taken aback, tried to find her footing again. "That's a moving story, Senator," she said, her voice almost gentle. "But let's expand the lens. You speak of Jesus as the answer. But what about the millions who've found peace through meditation, or ancient wisdom, or self-discovery? Are you saying all of that is meaningless?" The question came not as a jab, but as a genuine plea, an echo of the voices of many who had built their lives around practices outside of Christianity. It was also, perhaps, the first time Oprah revealed a flicker of vulnerability, not as the media mogul, but as someone asking the deeper question. "Have I missed something?" Kennedy leaned back in his chair slightly, hands folded calmly in his lap. "Oprah," he said gently, "I believe people find comfort in many things, but comfort isn't the same as truth. If your house is on fire, Sipping tea may calm you down, but it won't save you. The metaphor landed with weight. Gasps rippled across the crowd. Some clapped reflexively. Others sat in quiet shock. "I'm not saying meditation is evil," he clarified. "I'm saying it can't do what only Jesus can do: rescue a soul. Peace is beautiful, but we need more than temporary calm. We need eternal hope." Oprah's smile faltered, her lips pressing into a thoughtful line. For the first time, she didn't fire back. The audience, sensing the shift, leaned further into the moment. After a long pause, she asked, "So, if someone finds healing and joy in something other than Christianity, say in Buddhism or through one of my courses, are you saying that's just illusion?" Kennedy's expression didn't harden. It softened. "I'm saying," he replied, "those moments of peace might be glimpses of something bigger. But healing isn't the same as salvation. You've helped a lot of folks feel better. I believe that. But feeling better doesn't always mean being whole." He let the sentence sit, unhurried. "We're all broken, Oprah. Every one of us. I'm not better than anyone who follows another path. I just know the path that saved me, and I can't keep it to myself." The crowd stirred again, some faces tense, others contemplative. Oprah sat still, her fingers tracing the edge of her cue cards as if they might ground her. Then, with a breath, she launched her boldest strike yet. "But Senator," she said, her voice gaining strength again, "don't you see the danger in this kind of certainty? You're a public figure. When you say Jesus is the only way, you're not just sharing an opinion. You're shaping how people think, how they vote, how they judge others. Isn't that dangerous?" The audience inhaled collectively. The line between faith and influence had been drawn. Oprah had placed Kennedy's beliefs in the spotlight not as a personal testimony, but as a potential weapon. Kennedy sat silently for a moment. Then he spoke. Calm, firm, but deeply personal. "Power is always dangerous," he said. "It depends on how you use it. You can use it to shine a light or cast a shadow. I talk about Jesus not to control people, but to set them free. Free from fear, from shame, from chasing things that never satisfy." He paused again, then held up the folded letter. "This isn't political leverage. This is a lifeline. That boy, Tommy, he's not a voter. He's a child looking for hope. And if my faith gives him that, then yes, I'll keep sharing it, no matter the cost." Applause broke out, not polite or hesitant, real, rising, emotionally, charged. The camera swept across tearful faces, clasped hands, whispered prayers. Something profound had stirred. Oprah, visibly moved, struggled to hold her composure. Her eyes glistened, and her voice, for once, lacked its trademark precision. "Senator," she said slowly, "I've spent decades helping people heal. I've seen lives transformed through the tools I've shared. Books, meditations, teachings. Are you saying that doesn't count? That all of it, all of me, was wrong?" Kennedy didn't smile. He didn't pounce. He simply said, "It matters, Oprah. Because kindness always matters. But the question isn't whether you've helped people feel better. It's whether you've pointed them to the one who can make them whole." That line dropped into the room like thunder. The silence that followed was holy. No cameras moved. No one blinked. Oprah sat, hands folded, her posture more introspective than regal. Kennedy's words hadn't wounded her. They'd opened something. The segment ended not with music or applause, but with a hush that felt sacred. As the studio returned from commercial break, the Harpo stage glowed once more in its signature golden hue. But something had changed. The usual post-break applause was absent. Instead, there was a reverent stillness, as though the air had thickened, with unseen weight. The cameras rolled, but the audience was no longer watching for entertainment. They were witnessing something more, something sacred. Oprah sat back in her chair, hands delicately folded in her lap. Her usual commanding poise was replaced by a quiet contemplation. Her shoulders held the memory of tension, but her face carried something else, something raw. She looked at Senator John Kennedy, her expression softening in ways unfamiliar, too. Daytime television. "Senator," she said, her voice slower, more personal, "you've stirred something in me, and probably in a lot of the people watching. You've spoken with such conviction, such peace. But I have to ask, how can you be so sure that your Jesus is the only truth?" She paused, her eyes scanning his, as if searching for a way out, or a way in. "I've spent my life helping people," she continued, "offering tools for healing, self-discovery, meditation, ancient practices. I've seen people transformed by those paths. Are you saying all of that, all of me, has been misguided?" The question didn't come as a challenge. It came like a confession. And for the first time in the interview, Oprah Winfrey wasn't playing host. She was simply human. The audience, sensing the sacredness of the moment, leaned in, their breaths shallow. They had come to see a conversation, but now they were witnessing a soul in question. Kennedy didn't answer right away. He looked at Oprah not with triumph, but with tenderness. Then, slowly, he reached for the folded letter from Tommy's mother. Though he didn't open it, he simply held it, grounding himself once more in truth. That wasn't his alone. "Oprah," he said softly, "I'm not here to dismantle what you've built. I'm not saying every path is empty. But I am saying there's only one that leads to the truth that saves." He leaned forward slightly, his tone pastoral. "I've walked other paths. I've tried philosophy, self-help, rituals. I've read more than a few of your books, but none of those things gave me peace that stayed. Peace that held me when my mother died, or when I lost my first election, or when I sat with a grieving family after a flood." He paused again. "It wasn't until I met Jesus, not an idea, not a system, but a savior, that I found the kind of peace that doesn't crack under pressure. That's not opinion. That's rescue." The studio remained still, as if every sound might shatter the weight of what had just been said. Oprah's eyes welled up. She blinked, looking away briefly, trying to regain her bearings, but she couldn't hide the emotion building in her throat. Her hands trembled as she pressed them together. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered, almost too softly for the mic to catch. "I've always been in control." The audience inhaled as one. Kennedy's response was simple. But, like everything he'd said that day, it struck a chord. "That's exactly where he wants you, Oprah," he said. "Out of answers. Ready to listen. That's where all of us begin." Oprah looked up, eyes shimmering. For a long moment, she said nothing. Her lips parted, then closed again. She wasn't battling Kennedy anymore. She was battling herself. Then, slowly, she stood. Her movements were not rehearsed. There was no cue, no applause sign flashing above the crowd. She simply stood. Her knees wobbled slightly, and the strength in her voice had thinned. "Senator," she said, looking at him but also beyond him, If I've spent my life pointing people in the wrong direction, what does that make me? The audience froze, witnessing the unraveling of a public certainty they'd revered for decades. Kennedy stood too, not out of authority, but solidarity. He took a step closer, his voice low and full of grace. "It makes you human," he replied. "Just like the rest of us." He placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "The good news is, Jesus doesn't need you to have it all figured out. He takes your regrets, your past, your pain, and he makes something beautiful from them. That's not condemnation. That's grace." Tears streamed down Oprah's face. She didn't wipe them away. The woman who had inspired millions to embrace. Their power now stood vulnerable, open, and utterly unmasked. And then, without warning, without flourish, she dropped to her knees. It wasn't a television moment. It was something else. A surrender. The queen of daytime television knelt. Not in defeat, but in transformation. The crowd gasped. Some cried openly. Others closed their eyes, moved by a presence that wasn't crafted by producers, but stirred from something eternal. "I don't know how to pray," Oprah murmured, her voice shaking. Kennedy knelt beside her. "You don't have to. He hears the brokenhearted. He hears this." Then, quietly, he bowed his head. "Jesus," he said gently, "here is your daughter. She's tired of carrying the weight alone. Show her your truth, your peace, your rest." The audience followed, some bowing heads, some whispering prayers, some simply weeping in awe. The show, once framed around philosophy and pluralism, had become a holy moment, broadcast live to millions. There was no applause, no outro music, no smooth segue to a commercial, only silence. The cameras kept rolling, but no one was watching the monitors. No producers shouted cues. No stagehands adjusted lights. The control room had fallen into a stunned silence, watching Oprah Winfrey, icon of empowerment, beacon of modern spirituality, on her knees beside Senator John Kennedy, weeping in a moment of surrender. The audience remained still, as if afraid that even the softest clap would break the sacred stillness that had descended. There were no lights dimming, no music swells, no voiceover transitions. It wasn't a show anymore. It was something deeper, something real. Oprah slowly stood, wiping her face, but not her tears. Her mascara ran, her eyeliner blurred, but in that moment, she looked more human than she ever had. More true. Her voice trembled as she faced the audience again. "I don't know what this means for everything I've taught," she said, "but I know I can't keep pretending I have all the answers, because I don't." The audience began to softly applaud, not the polite kind meant to fill space, but the kind that came from the chest, from people who had just watched a transformation. Some cried, others whispered prayers, still others sat silently, hearts stirred in ways they didn't yet understand. Kennedy stepped back slightly, allowing Oprah the space to breathe, to stand in her own new truth. He wasn't there to take the spotlight. He'd never wanted it. His face was calm, his gaze steady, not with pride, but with peace. As the show wrapped without fanfare, Oprah and Kennedy walked off the stage together, not as host and guest, but as two souls who had met in the sacred terrain between doubt and conviction. In the days that followed, the internet exploded. Clips of the moment flooded every corner of social media. Some ridiculed it. Others rejoiced. Headlines ran wild. Oprah kneels in faith. John Kennedy shakes spiritual empire. A turning point in American media. But beyond the noise, something else was happening. Something slower, quieter, and far more powerful. Oprah canceled her next series of spiritual masterclasses. She issued a statement. For years, I've tried to help people find healing through many paths, but I've realized healing without truth is just a band-aid. I've encountered something greater. Someone greater. I don't have all the answers, but I want to pursue the one who does. Instead of launching new books or courses, she began quietly visiting hospitals, sitting with mothers, funding shelters, not with cameras following her, but with her heart leading the way. The woman who had built an empire on teaching self-power now lived with a different mission: service through surrender. Senator Kennedy, meanwhile, continued his work in Washington, but something in him had shifted too. His voice in Senate hearings became more tempered, more patient. He listened longer, and when reporters asked him what changed, he simply said, "When truth is spoken in love, it doesn't need volume, it just needs courage." The ripple effects were stunning. Churches reported spikes in attendance, not because of celebrity, but because people were hungry for something real. Real hope, real answers, real faith. And then, weeks later, on her own streaming platform, Oprah reappeared. Not for a new show, not for a product launch, but for a conversation. She sat alone on a simple wooden stool, no makeup, no spotlight, just her and the lens. I want to thank everyone who's written to me. Those who were confused, those who were angry, those who were moved. I don't pretend to understand what happened that day, but I know this: I'm not the same. And I don't want to go back. She paused, her eyes steady. For years, I sold comfort. But Senator Kennedy showed me what it means to find truth. Not just something that feels good, but something that sets you free. I'm not perfect. I'm still learning. But I'm not ashamed to say, I met Jesus. The message went viral, not as a PR stunt, but as a cultural earthquake. People who had once followed Oprah for her wisdom now followed her for her humility. And Kennedy? He didn't seek credit. He never mentioned it again on air. But those who knew him said he carried that folded letter from Tommy's mom like a sacred scripture. Creased, faded, but full of eternal weight. One afternoon, after a town hall meeting in a small Louisiana church, a reporter asked him if he believed that moment on Oprah's stage would be remembered in history. He chuckled. I don't care about history, he said. I care about eternity. Then he walked outside, shook hands with a janitor, and sat down beside a crying widow. No cameras, no crowd, just the kind of love that doesn't need to be seen to be true. Because that's what this story is really about. Not about Oprah, not about Kennedy, not about a TV moment, but about the God who reaches into studios, into Senate chambers, into souls, and whispers, I'm still here.